What happens when a royal guest forgets he's not sitting on a throne? In just 29 seconds, Prince Harry went from composed interviewee to the man being shown the studio door. This wasn't a polite disagreement. This was a full-blown meltdown on live television, and George Stephanopoulos wasn't having any of it. The morning started like any other Tuesday on Good Morning America. The studio lights were bright, the cameras were rolling, and George Stephanopoulos sat across from Prince Harry, ready for what everyone thought would be a standard interview. The topic was supposed to be Harry's latest charitable initiative, something safe, something predictable. But within minutes, it became clear this interview was going to be anything but ordinary. George opened with a straightforward question. Simple, professional, exactly what you'd expect from a veteran journalist with decades of experience. Your Royal Highness, let's talk about your foundation's work. Can you walk us through what you hope to accomplish this year? Harry shifted in his seat, his jaw tightened. Instead of answering the question, he leaned forward, his eyes narrowing at George. Actually, George, I think we need to address something else first. I think we need to talk about why American media continues to misrepresent my family. Every single interview I do, it's the same thing. You people never get it right. The studio went quiet. You could feel the tension through the screen. George kept his composure, his face neutral, his voice steady. I understand you have concerns, but we're here today to discuss your charitable work. That's what we agreed to talk about. Harry wasn't listening. His face was flushed now, his voice rising with every word. What we agreed to? You mean what your producers agreed to so they could get me on this show? Do you have any idea how many interview requests I turned down? And this is how you treat me? Like I'm just another guest you can push around? George remained calm, but you could see it in his eyes. He wasn't going to let this slide. With all due respect, Your Royal Highness, every guest on this program is treated with the same level of professionalism. We prepared for this interview based on the topics your team provided. If you'd like to discuss media coverage, we can certainly do that, but I'd appreciate it if we could maintain a respectful dialogue. That should have been the moment Harry took a breath. That should have been when he realized he was on live television, speaking to millions of people. But instead, he doubled down. Respectful dialogue? That's rich, coming from someone who spent years in politics, spinning stories for your own benefit. You think I don't know how this works? You think I'm naive? I've been dealing with people like you my entire life, George. People who smile to your face and then twist everything you say the moment the camera stops rolling. The crew behind the cameras exchanged glances. This was getting out of hand. George's expression hardened, but his voice stayed level. I'm not sure what you're implying, but I take my role as a journalist very seriously. I've never twisted anyone's words, and I certainly wouldn't start now. If you have an issue with how this interview is going, we can end it right here and give you time to collect yourself. Harry stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. His face was red, his hands gesturing wildly. Collect myself? How dare you? How absolutely dare you speak to me that way? Do you know who I am? Do you understand what I've sacrificed to be here, to do this interview, to give you and your show this opportunity? George stood up too, his 6-foot frame matching Harry's energy, but with none of the hostility. His voice was firm now, cutting through Harry's tirade. I know exactly who you are. You're a guest on this program, just like everyone else who sits in that chair. And right now, you're being disrespectful not just to me, but to this entire team who prepared for your appearance. If you can't conduct yourself professionally, then this interview is over. For a split second, it looked like Harry might calm down. His mouth opened, then closed, but then his pride took over again, and what came next shocked everyone in that studio. You're a disgrace to journalism, George. An absolute disgrace. You sit here in your fancy chair, pretending to be impartial, but you're just another puppet for the system. You're no better than the tabloids you claim to be above. In fact, you're worse, because at least they're honest about what they are. The producers were frantically signaling to cut to commercial, but George held up his hand. He wasn't done. That's enough. I've given you every opportunity to have a constructive conversation, and you've chosen to make this personal. I won't tolerate being spoken to this way, and I won't subject my team to it either. This interview is finished. I'm going to ask you to leave the studio. Harry's eyes went wide. He clearly hadn't expected that response. You're kicking me out? You're actually kicking me out of this interview? George nodded, his jaw set. Yes, I am. You came here as a guest. You were invited to discuss important work that you're doing. Instead, you've spent the last several minutes attacking me personally and questioning my integrity. That's not what this platform is for, and I won't allow it to continue." Harry looked around the studio as if waiting for someone to come to his defense. No one moved. The crew members stood frozen, cameras still rolling, capturing every second of this disaster. "This is unbelievable. Wait until people hear about this. Wait until the world hears how George Stephanopoulos treated me. You'll regret this." George remained perfectly still, his voice unwavering. "The world is watching right now. They're seeing exactly what happened here. I have nothing to regret because I conducted myself with professionalism from the moment you sat down. I can't say the same for you." That was it. That was the line that ended everything. Harry's face went from red to almost purple. He ripped off his microphone, the wire snapping as he yanked it too hard. He threw it on the desk between them. "Keep your microphone. Keep your show. Keep all of it. You're not worth my time." He stormed toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the silent studio. 2 security personnel appeared at the edge of the set, ready to escort him out if needed. Harry shot them a look of pure contempt. "Don't touch me. I know the way out." George watched him leave, then turned back to the camera. His expression was composed, but you could see the weight of what just happened settling over him. He took a breath, straightened his tie, and spoke directly to the viewers at home. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for what you just witnessed. This is not how we conduct interviews on Good Morning America, and it's not how we treat our guests. Unfortunately, when a guest cannot engage in respectful dialogue, we have to make difficult decisions. We'll take a quick break and be right back." The cameras finally cut away. The studio erupted in chaos. Producers were on their phones. Crew members were talking over each other. But George just stood there, still and quiet, processing what had just unfolded. One of the producers rushed over to him, tablet in hand. "George, we're getting flooded with responses already. Social media is exploding." George shook his head, his expression weary. "I don't care about social media right now. What I care about is that we gave someone a platform and they used it to be disrespectful and hostile. That's on him, not us." Another producer chimed in, looking concerned. "Do you think we should have handled it differently? Maybe let him cool down?" George turned to face them, his voice firm but not angry. "No, we handled it exactly right. When someone crosses a line, you don't reward that behavior by giving them more time to cross more lines. We have standards here. We have respect for the people who work on this show and the people who watch it." The moment he started attacking me personally and calling me a disgrace, it was over. There was no coming back from that. The commercial break ended. George returned to his seat, took a sip of water, and looked back into the camera. His demeanor was completely professional again, as if the last few minutes hadn't just shaken the entire studio. "Welcome back to Good Morning America. We had planned to spend this segment continuing our conversation, but as you saw, that's no longer possible. Instead, let's talk about what just happened, because I think it's important." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "We invite guests onto this program because we believe they have something valuable to share. We prepare thoroughly, we respect their time, and we expect the same in return. When that mutual respect breaks down, when a guest decides to use our platform to launch personal attacks instead of engaging in meaningful conversation, we have a responsibility to our audience to maintain our standards." His co-host, Robin Roberts, who had been watching from the side, stepped in to support him. "George, I think you handled that with incredible grace. Nobody should have to deal with that kind of disrespect, especially not on live television." George nodded, grateful for the support. "Thank you, Robin. Look, interviews can be challenging. People get passionate about topics they care about. I understand that. But there's a difference between passion and hostility. There's a difference between disagreeing with a question and attacking the person asking it. Today, we saw someone who couldn't make that distinction. Back in the hallway outside the studio, Harry was pacing back and forth, still fuming. His handlers were trying to calm him down, but he wasn't having it. "Do you see what just happened in there? Did you see how he spoke to me? That man has no respect, none whatsoever." One of his advisors spoke up cautiously. "Sir, perhaps we should discuss what happened. The interview didn't go as planned, and maybe we could reach out to the producers to smooth things over." Harry spun around, his finger pointed accusingly. "Smooth things over? Why would I want to smooth things over with people who clearly don't appreciate what I bring to their show? They should be apologizing to me. George should be apologizing to me." Another advisor tried a different approach. The footage is already circulating online. People are commenting. Perhaps we should consider putting out a statement. Harry waved his hand dismissively. Let them comment. Let them talk. When the dust settles, everyone will see that I was the one who was wronged here. I came to that interview with good intentions, and I was met with hostility and disrespect. That's the story. That's what people need to know. But that wasn't the story people were seeing. The footage told a different tale entirely. Viewers watched as Harry escalated a simple question into a full-blown confrontation. They saw George remain calm and professional while Harry lost control. They heard the personal attacks, the entitled outbursts, the complete breakdown of decorum. Back on set, George wrapped up the segment with his usual professionalism. We're going to move on now to our next story. But before we do, I want to thank all of you at home for your understanding. Live television means anything can happen, and sometimes it does. What matters is how we respond in those moments. We responded by maintaining our standards, and will continue to do so every single day. The show continued. The crew reset for the next segment, and George Stephanopoulos, veteran journalist and seasoned professional, moved forward like nothing had happened. Because for him, it was simple. You treat people with respect, you maintain your standards, and when someone can't do the same, you don't compromise. The building security eventually escorted Harry out through a side entrance to avoid the growing crowd of reporters who had heard about the incident. His car pulled up, and he climbed in without a word to anyone. As they drove away from the studio, one of his handlers tried one more time. Sir, we really should discuss how to address this publicly. The reaction online is quite strong. Harry stared out the window, his jaw still clenched. I don't want to hear about the reaction. I don't care what people are saying. I know what happened in there. I know I was disrespected. That's all that matters. But it wasn't all that mattered. In the world of television, in the court of public opinion, what mattered was what people saw. And what they saw was crystal clear. They saw a host who tried to conduct a professional interview. They saw a guest who couldn't handle a simple question without turning it into a personal attack. They saw George Stephanopoulos stand his ground and refuse to be bullied. And they saw Prince Harry throw away an opportunity because he couldn't control his temper. Inside the studio, after the show wrapped, the team gathered around George. No one quite knew what to say. Finally, one of the younger producers broke the silence. I've never seen anything like that before. How did you stay so calm? George loosened his tie and allowed himself a small smile. Years of practice, and knowing that the moment you lose your composure, you lose everything. He wanted me to react. He wanted me to get defensive or angry. If I had done that, we would have been on equal footing. Instead, I stayed professional, and that made all the difference. Another crew member shook their head in disbelief. I can't believe he called you a disgrace to journalism. That was so out of line. George nodded, his expression more serious now. It was. But here's the thing. When someone resorts to personal attacks, it usually means they've run out of legitimate arguments. He came in with an agenda that had nothing to do with his charity work, and when I didn't play along, he couldn't handle it. That's not on me. That's on him. The executive producer pulled George aside for a private word. You know this is going to be a major story, right? Every media outlet is going to be covering this. George sighed, rubbing his temples. I know, but we did the right thing. We gave him every chance to have a productive conversation, and he chose chaos instead. We're not going to apologize for maintaining standards. We're not going to feel bad about refusing to be disrespected on our own show. Whatever happens next, we can face it knowing we handled this correctly. The executive producer smiled, clapping George on the shoulder. That's exactly right. You represented this show perfectly. You represented journalism perfectly. I'm proud of how you handled that. As the team started packing up for the day, the full weight of what happened began to sink in. This wasn't just a bad interview. This was a defining moment. A line had been drawn between professional conduct and entitled behavior, between respectful disagreement and hostile confrontation, between someone who understood the privilege of having a platform and someone who believed the platform was lucky to have them. George gathered his notes and his briefcase. As he walked toward the exit, he passed by the empty chair where Harry had been sitting less than an hour ago. For a moment, he stopped and looked at it. There was no satisfaction in what had happened, no joy in having to remove a guest from his show. But there was certainty. Certainty that he had done what needed to be done. One of the makeup artists caught up with him at the door. George, can I just say something? I've worked on this show for 15 years, and I've seen hundreds of interviews. What you did today, standing up for yourself and for all of us, that took real courage. Thank you." George's expression softened. "I appreciate that, but I didn't do it for courage. I did it because it was right." When you let someone treat you badly without consequences, you're not just accepting their behavior, you're endorsing it, and I won't do that, not for anyone, regardless of who they are or what title they have. He left the building to a swarm of cameras and questions. Reporters shouted over each other, trying to get his reaction, his thoughts, his take on what had just transpired. But George simply smiled, waved politely, and climbed into his car. He had said everything he needed to say on air. There was nothing left to add. Meanwhile, across town, Harry sat in his hotel suite, scrolling through his phone. The headlines were brutal. The reactions were harsh. Video clips of his outbursts were being shared millions of times. Everyone had an opinion, and most of them weren't favorable to him. His publicist knocked on the door and entered cautiously. "We need to make a decision about how to respond. The longer we wait, the worse this gets." Harry threw his phone onto the couch. "Fine, draft something. Say I was passionate about addressing media accountability. Say I felt the interview wasn't going in a productive direction. Make it sound good." The publicist looked uncomfortable. "Sir, with respect, the footage shows exactly what happened. Any statement we put out needs to acknowledge that you may have overreacted. People aren't going to buy a spin on this." They saw it with their own eyes. Harry stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the city below. "I didn't overreact. I reacted appropriately to being disrespected. There's a difference." The publicist chose their next words very carefully. "Perhaps, but the public doesn't see it that way. And right now, public perception is all that matters." George Stephanopoulos is being praised for how he handled the situation. Meanwhile, you're being criticized for losing your temper on live television. If we don't address this properly, it could have lasting consequences for your reputation. For the first time since leaving the studio, Harry seemed to waver. The reality of the situation was starting to penetrate through his anger. "What do you suggest?" The publicist pulled out a tablet and showed him some of the reactions. "Look at these comments. Look at what people are saying. They're not defending you, they're defending George. Even people who support you in general are saying you went too far. If you want to salvage this, you need to own what happened. A real apology, not a spin job." Harry took the tablet and scrolled through the comments. Each one felt like a punch to the gut. People weren't just criticizing his behavior, they were questioning his character. They were comparing him unfavorably to George. They were saying he acted entitled, immature, disrespectful. He handed the tablet back, his voice quieter now. "I hear you, but I'm not ready to apologize yet. Give me some time to think about this." The publicist nodded and left the room. Harry sat down heavily on the couch, replaying the interview in his mind. Had he really been that bad? Had he really crossed a line? The more he thought about it, the more uncomfortable he became. But pride is a powerful thing, and it wasn't ready to let go just yet. Back at the Good Morning America studio, the team was celebrating in their own quiet way. Not celebrating the conflict, but celebrating the fact that they had stood their ground. That they had refused to compromise their values for the sake of keeping a high-profile guest comfortable. George sat in his dressing room, finally allowing himself to process everything. His phone was blowing up with messages of support from colleagues, friends, and even competitors. Everyone in the industry seemed to understand what he had done and why it mattered. Robin Roberts knocked on his door and peeked her head in. "Hey, you okay?" George looked up and smiled. "Yeah, I'm okay. It was intense, but I'm okay." Robin sat down across from him. "You know what I respect most about what you did? You didn't let his title intimidate you. You treated him exactly how you'd treat anyone else who acted that way. That's real integrity." George leaned back in his chair. "That's the only way to do this job, Robin. The moment you start treating people differently based on who they are rather than how they behave, you lose your credibility. I've worked too hard and too long to throw that away for anyone." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Robin spoke again. "Do you think he'll apologize?" George shrugged. "I have no idea. Honestly, whether he does or not doesn't change anything for me. What happened, happened. The footage speaks for itself. If he wants to own his behavior and make amends, that's his choice. If he wants to double down and blame me, that's also his choice. Either way, I know I handled it correctly." Robin stood up to leave. "Well, for what it's worth, everyone here is behind you 100%. That includes me." George smiled warmly. "Thanks, Robin. That means a lot." As the evening news cycle picked up the story, the contrast between the two men became even more stark. George was giving measured, thoughtful statements about maintaining professional standards. Harry was silent, leaving his team to scramble for damage control. One man had risen to the occasion, the other had crumbled under pressure. The next morning, as George prepared for another show, he received an unexpected email. It was from a journalism student who had watched the incident unfold live. The email read, "Mr. Stephanopoulos, I'm studying broadcast journalism, and I wanted to thank you for what you did yesterday. You showed me and countless other aspiring journalists that integrity matters more than access, that respect matters more than ratings, that standing up for yourself and your team is not optional, it's essential. You gave us all a masterclass in how to handle a difficult situation with grace and strength. Thank you for being the example we needed to see." George read the email twice, feeling a sense of validation wash over him. This was why he had done what he did, not for the headlines or the praise, but because it was the right thing to do. Because future journalists needed to see that you don't compromise your principles, even when facing royalty. He replied simply, "Thank you for your kind words." Remember, our job is to ask questions and seek truth, not to enable bad behavior. Always stay true to that, and you'll do just fine in this profession. And that, really, was the heart of everything. In 29 seconds, Prince Harry had destroyed his own credibility. In that same time, George Stephanopoulos had reinforced his. One man had shown what it looks like when entitlement meets accountability. The other had shown what it looks like when professionalism meets disrespect. The cameras had captured it all, and the world had watched. There was no spinning this. There was no rewriting what happened. It was simply the truth, broadcast live for everyone to see. And sometimes, the truth is the most powerful story of all. The studio had returned to normal operations, but the impact of that morning lingered. Every person who worked on the show, from the camera operators to the sound technicians to the producers, felt a renewed sense of pride in what they did. They weren't just making television, they were upholding standards. They were part of something bigger than ratings or celebrity interviews. One of the camera operators, a man named Marcus who had been with the show for 20 years, approached George during a break. "George, I've filmed thousands of interviews over the years. I've seen hosts get angry, defensive, combative, but I've never seen someone handle a situation like that with such control. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't get personal until he forced you to draw a line. You just stayed steady. That's leadership." George shook his hand firmly. "Marcus, I've been doing this job long enough to know that losing control is the worst thing you can do. The moment you react emotionally instead of professionally, you've lost. I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. More importantly, I wasn't going to let down everyone who worked so hard to make this show what it is." The incident had become more than just a viral moment. It had become a teaching moment. Journalism schools were using the footage to demonstrate how to handle hostile interview subjects. Leadership seminars were analyzing George's composure under pressure. Even crisis management experts were breaking down the exchange, pointing to it as an example of how to maintain authority without escalating conflict. Meanwhile, Harry's team was still trying to figure out their next move. Every angle they explored seemed to lead to the same conclusion. There was no way to make him look good in this situation. The facts were the facts. He had come to the interview with an attitude. He had turned a professional conversation into a personal attack. He had disrespected not just George, but the entire production. His senior advisor finally sat him down for a direct conversation. "Sir, I'm going to be completely honest with you because that's what you need right now. This isn't going away. Every hour we wait makes it worse. The narrative is set, and it's not in your favor. The only way to change that is to take full responsibility for what happened." Harry looked exhausted, the fight finally draining out of him. "What exactly are you suggesting?" The advisor pulled out a prepared statement. "A public apology. No excuses, no justifications. Just a simple acknowledgement that you acted inappropriately and that George Stephanopoulos and his team deserve better. That's it. That's the only play we have left." Harry took the paper and read it slowly. Every word felt like swallowing glass. But deep down, beneath all the pride and defensiveness, he knew it was true. He had messed up. He had let his emotions control him. He had treated people badly who didn't deserve it. "All right, send it out." The advisor looked surprised. "You're sure? Once this goes out, there's no taking it back." Harry nodded, his voice quiet but resolute. "I'm sure. I was wrong. I need to own that. George didn't deserve what I said to him. His team didn't deserve to witness that, and the people watching didn't deserve to see me act that way. Send it out." Within minutes, the statement was released. It was brief, sincere, and took full responsibility. No blame shifting, no excuses about jet lag or misunderstandings, just an honest admission that he had behaved inappropriately and an apology to everyone involved. When George saw the statement, he was in his office preparing for the next day's show. He read it twice, then set his phone down. One of the producers knocked and entered. "Did you see the apology?" George nodded. "I did. It takes courage to admit you were wrong, especially on such a public stage. I respect that he did it." The producer seemed surprised. "You're not angry anymore?" George leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I was never angry. I was disappointed. Disappointed that it had to happen that way. But anger? No. And now that he's acknowledged what happened and taken responsibility, there's nothing left to be upset about. We all have bad days. We all make mistakes. What matters is what you do afterward. He did the right thing by apologizing. I can respect that. That's the difference between someone who understands their job and someone who's just playing a role." George had never needed an apology to validate his actions. He knew what he had done was right, but he could appreciate that Harry had found the strength to admit his mistake. That took character, even if it came late. The public reaction to the apology was mixed. Some people praised Harry for owning his behavior. Others felt it was too little, too late. But regardless of opinion, one thing was clear. The incident had shown everyone watching what happens when entitlement meets professionalism, when emotion meets composure, when someone forgets that respect is earned, not demanded. George continued doing what he always did, showing up every day, asking tough questions, holding people accountable, treating everyone with respect until they proved they didn't deserve it. And when they didn't deserve it, handling the situation with grace and firmness. The morning after the apology went public, George received a handwritten note delivered to the studio. It was from Harry. Not a public gesture, just a private acknowledgement. The note was simple. "George, I hope you can accept my personal apology as well. I was completely out of line. You conducted yourself with dignity while I lost mine. Thank you for showing me what professionalism looks like, even if I had to learn it the hard way. With sincere regret, Harry." George folded the note and put it in his desk drawer. He didn't need to make a public show of it. He didn't need to wave it around as proof of anything. It was between them, and that was enough. In the end, the story wasn't really about a prince or a journalist. It was about something much more universal. It was about how we treat each other when we disagree, how we handle ourselves when we're frustrated, how we respond when someone holds us accountable. George had shown the world that you don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to attack to make a point. You just need to stand firm in your values and refuse to compromise them for anyone. And that's a lesson worth learning, whether you're a television host, a royal guest, or anyone in between.